Hello, my name is Sara Beth Kovalcik, and I will be presenting my thesis, A Nation's Cry, the Overmedication of America's Children. Imagine, you are hanging halfway out of your Newark apartment window, calculating how long it would take you to hit the ground if you jumped. For many years, you have been stuck in cycles of pain that seem to have no end. Suddenly, you rush to your bathroom cabinet, where pill bottles line the shelves. In these pills, however, there is no more than just a vapor of hope that quickly disperses. At just 30 years old, Brooke CM, a renowned chef and author of the best-selling series May Cause Side Effects, found herself in this exact situation. She had spent half her life and her entire adult life on antidepressants and wondered who she might be without them. Originally diagnosed with depression in the wake of her father's death, her psychiatric intervention sent a very particular message. It was all her fault. Ingrained into her brain was the idea that something was pathologically wrong with her, and the only fix was medicine. As a child, Brooke stepped into the world of antidepressants right at the time she was forming the foundations of her identity. And for the next 15 years, every situation would now be viewed through this lens of brokenness. Brooke's story of alienation and mistreatment is not new. In Charlotte Bronte's novel, Jane Eyre, the main character was cast aside by her family and society for not conforming to their standards. At a young age, Jane had lost her parents and was sent to live with her neglectful aunt. While there, she endured physical abuse and torment by her cousin John. One day, when it became too much for her, she lashed out on John like a mad cat. In response, her aunt locked her in a room to think on her wickedness. During this period of isolation, she is overcome with fear and experiences a spell of unconsciousness. Not knowing what to do with her, her aunt calls the apothecary. While Jane does recover from this initial experience, she continues to have episodes of emotional distress until eventually she is sent away to boarding school. Jane's actions may not have been socially acceptable, but they were not the result of a character flaw or bad propensities. Rather, they were her desperate attempt to express her emotions of being misunderstood and unsafe. Jane states that children can feel, but they cannot analyze their feelings. Bronte's novel, written over 200 years ago, captures the remarkable truth of misunderstanding adolescent emotions. Unfortunately, the contemporary approach is just as ineffective as the 19th century's. While then, children were expected to be seen and not heard, today's children are still expected to conform to our ideals, but now through the aid of a pill. The industrialized world is facing an absurd reality where children are being treated with medication promptly and without the full consideration of the potential detrimental consequences. Dr. Amit Winterstein, a professor at the University of Florida, along with fellows at the International Department of Psychology, agree that there is a significant amount of ADHD drug treatment happening at a young age that is not supported by evidence. This trend is not unique to ADHD and applies to all types of neurodivergence and is a threat to children's ability to thrive. For example, a 3-year-old boy named D'Angelo was removed from his mother's care after she attempted suicide in front of him. After his removal, he was sent to live with his grandparents, but still remained in contact with his mother. When he was 8 years old, his mother manipulated him into convincing Child Protective Services that he was being abused by his grandparents so that she could regain custody of him. The guilt of lying and incriminating his family, accompanied with his general lack of support, caused D'Angelo to begin to misbehave, and soon he was placed into a mental institution for evaluation. While there, D'Angelo was prescribed Klonopin, a benzodiazepine, but received no other mental health services. His behaviors were attributed to his new diagnosis of ADHD. Over the next couple years, D'Angelo continued to experience trauma at the hands of the foster care system and family members. He was sexually abused by a family friend, manipulated, and bounced around from group home to group home. His medication changed multiple times as he was prescribed antidepressants, antipsychotics, and stimulants, but his condition remained the same, leaving him feeling broken and confused. Fortunately for D'Angelo, right before he turned 18, he entered an equine therapy program where he made drastic improvement. D'Angelo is an example of what multiple children are currently facing today. In another case, 6-year-old Gabriel experienced some of the same horrific traumas as D'Angelo, including sexual assault and neglect. Just like D'Angelo, he began to misbehave and was prescribed medication, again without the accompaniment of any other mental health services. Gabriel was diagnosed with ADHD and impulse control disorder. One day, after being sent to his room for his behavior, Gabriel took his own life. While ending in different outcomes, both Gabriel and D'Angelo's story share the same common problem. They were let down by the very system that was supposed to protect them because of their caretakers' tendencies to use medication as a quick fix to their emotional distress. Medicine is central to modern society. Medications like Advil, Dramamine, and vaccines are all within a moment's notice, and insulin made a once deadly disease manageable. Certainly, these medications have made society more efficient, improved conditions, and made life overall easier. But how far should medication be allowed to go? Are there certain areas of life that medication should not dominate? Today, pharmaceuticals intrude on almost every area of life, including the social and mental well-being of children. The National Survey of Children's Health recently found that the number of children aged 2 to 5 taking psychoactive medication has doubled. While psychoactive medications are not inherently evil, their standardization has led to a new medicalization of children's mental health. When a problem arises in a child's behavior, parents and doctors instinctively lean towards the idea that there is a problem with the child and not the environment, lifestyle, and habits by which the child is surrounded by. Before other options have been explored, medication now dominates the conversation. Gen Z grew up with the most readily available mental health medications, and yet they are the most depressed and anxious generation. If these medications truly deserve the fame they're attracting, then wouldn't this generation be thriving? Could it be that the overuse of these medications is contributing to the mental health epidemic? Children are no longer learning how to regulate their emotions and instead forced to rely on the effects of a pill to make them feel less and be more manageable. This crisis of overmedication can only be resolved by a drastic change in the way the world views neurodivergence and a change in the way that drugs are prescribed for children. Mental health shifted from being a cognitive issue to a physiological one with the introduction of the monomind theory in the 1950s. This theory claimed that those who struggle with depression, anxiety, ADHD, and other similar conditions have a depletion of the chemicals norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin. This theory changed the way the world viewed medicine. It went from being an aid or tool to the so-called solution. But many psychiatrists have questioned the validity of the monomind theory and whether or not it still holds any weight. Ronald Pies, editor-in-chief of the Psychiatric Times, stated that the chemical imbalance notion has always been kind of an urban legend, never a theory seriously propounded by well-informed psychiatrists. Most recently, In the case of major depressive disorder, it was found that in most healthy patients, a depletion of these chemicals did not lead to depression. While it is true that these neurotransmitters can impact mental health, not every single person who struggles to regulate their emotion has a chemical imbalance. The deconstruction of this theory does not invalidate the seriousness of mental health issues, but rather brings to light that humans are not mere flesh, but body, mind, and soul. The dangerous problem of approaching children's mental health with only a physiological view can be seen in the example of Gabriel and D'Angelo. They were given the equivalent of a Band-Aid for a bullet hole. The traumas they endured were not something that could be erased by medication, and certainly not an inherent physiological problem. While medicine may have decreased the symptoms of these deep trauma wounds, the root issue festered underneath a cheap and generic fix. Because medical professionals tend to treat the symptoms rather than trying to methodically understand and treat the cause, they jump to medication. Dr. Mary Gleason, a professor at the University of Tulane, stated that doctors are in a position where they feel they must do something, and that unfortunately leads to what we see in terms of prescribing medication. This instinct to act removes all caution and is based upon a hasty conclusion. There is little research into the long-term side effects of these medications and how they might interfere with brain development. Joanna Moncrief writes in her study that the medical society is unclear on the neurochemical and physiological changes that occur when taking psychoactive medications, and whether or not the alterations produced return to normal once the drug is stopped. If this is true, then it is reasonable to say that medication should be a last resort and not a first-line option. If there were no other options, then the jump to medication would not be in haste. But the world, and especially most Western countries, has other effective options, like cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy is proven to be as effective or even more effective than medication. And the evidence surrounding CBT shows that it actually produces change, whereas medication can only temporarily alter behaviors. The long-term side effects of these medications must not be taken lightly. In short-term clinical trials, 4% of the medicated youth became suicidal. This was double the rate of the control group. In response, the FDA placed a black box warning on all psychoactive medications for their use in children. Placing a black box warning on a medication means that it has the potential for serious side effects that could lead to injury or even death. Despite this, prescription rates continue to rise. Currently, in the United States, 11.4% of children aged 5 to 11 are taking psychoactive medications. This is approximately 3 million children, and the number consistently rises each year. The marketers of these drugs often downplay the risk as small and insignificant, and were successful enough to hook society on the idea that the risk of these medications were necessary evils. But these medications are not as safe as they are marketed to be, and even the FDA had enough reservation to warn the public of this. Yet, this warning is consistently ignored in search of the promised benefits that seem so appealing. In one ad, for example, there is a depiction of a little boy who, when on medication, can finally remove his monster costume to reveal his true self underneath. This depiction not only demonizes the behavior of the child, but paints an overly idealistic picture of what medication can do, which will only lead to disappointment. A large issue that perpetuates these unrealistic expectations is the general lack of parental knowledge when it comes to children's emotional development. Clint Davis, owner of Clint Davis Counseling and Integrative Wellness, said that parents often feel the need to correct behaviors that are a part of normal human development. For example, a baby is eating and decides to pick up a wad of spaghetti and throw it on the floor. The parent feels that they must correct this inappropriate behavior and proceeds to swat the baby's hand. But that baby is in the early stages of learning object permanence. They have no understanding of what happens when they drop it on the floor. In the same way that young babies learn object permanence, young children are just beginning to develop their emotional processing skills. When a child acts out of irrational or intense behavior, it is often because they are feeling things they cannot yet logically describe or process. Eventually, over time, like how a baby learns to eat by watching how their parents do, a child should learn how to respond well to their emotions by watching how their parents regulate. This process can be long and can be even longer for children who are neurodivergent. For example, children who have endured trauma experience emotions at twice the intensity. This can result in roadblocks that make emotional regulation difficult, but it does not mean that it is impossible. During their formative years, children must be met with extreme patience and empathy, not frustration and control. At first, medicine may seem like a good option, as it can decrease intense behaviors. But how is a child expected to learn to control emotions they are never even allowed to have? The rush to medicate children is dangerous, and the results are seen in the ever-growing mental health epidemic. Even with this uncertainty surrounding psychoactive medications, a substantial amount of doctors would say that medication is beneficial, and in some cases, crucial. When an 11-year-old girl named Nora first started experiencing symptoms of depression, her parents originally did not want to put her on medication. But even after a 10-week course of therapy, her condition continued to decline. After multiple hospitalizations, her parents agreed that it would be best to try medication. Slowly, she did improve. According to her mother, without medication, it is likely that Nora would not be alive. While Nora is a positive example of medication, and while her story highlights the benefits it could bring, it's important to remember the way in which medication was being used. While there may be similar cases like Nora where medication is warranted, not every single case is this extreme. And it is highly unlikely that 3 million children are this severely mentally ill. In his book, The Myth of the Hyperactive Child, Peter Scragg argues that a small number of children actually have a condition sufficiently serious enough to warrant medication. When medication is being used to stabilize, and when it's kept within its bounds, it can be a good thing. And if this was how medication was commonly used, there wouldn't be an issue of overmedication. But Nora's story is uncharacteristic of what happens more often. When concerning behaviors first appear, many parents' first reaction is to bring it to the attention of their child's primary care provider. In fact, evidence shows that primary care doctors prescribe more mental health medication than psychiatrists. This should be alarming, considering that most primary care providers are not equipped nor have the time to provide comprehensive mental health care and evaluation. To evaluate their patients in these quick-paced settings, general practitioners rely on the patient health questionnaire charts. These charts ask the patient about how they've been feeling in the last 2 weeks, and then ask the patient to rate those questions on a scale of 0, not at all, 1, several days, 2, nearly half the days, and 3, every day. The numbers are then taken to result in an overall score. These charts are an unfortunate and lackluster attempt at turning complex individuals into simplified numerical terms. Relying on these charts can be extremely problematic and potentially lead to exaggerated responses. The difference between a diagnosis that does warrant medication and one that doesn't is 1 point. This 1 point could have easily been a mistake, considering how vague and subjective the questions are. The doctor in this situation is often like the last person in the common game telephone, who receives inaccurate or skewed information that has been lost in translation. This leads to children being prescribed unnecessary medication. Many would argue that no child is prescribed unnecessary medication based upon the assumption that no parent wants to medicate their child and only does so when absolutely necessary. In fact, online surveys show that parents actually have strong reservations about medication. Unfortunately, parents are often pressured into choosing medication because it is deemed the most responsible thing to do, and pushed into it by the child's doctor and even teacher. One parent shared the story of her son, who was, in her words, an active learner. For years, the school pressured her into putting him on medication, but she refused, knowing that while he was active, he was not violent nor disruptive. It is reasonable for parents to have reservations about medication. While certain psychoactive medications have been approved by the FDA for use in children, this does not mean that they should be prescribed in mass amounts. Furthermore, the FDA has been wrong before. Study 329 was a clinical trial done on the antidepressant Paxil and its use in children, and it originally concluded that Paxil was safe for children, despite multiple vague results. In 2001, Paxil was approved by the FDA for children. A few years later, after multiple deaths, new information concerning the trial proved that it in fact had been a negative trial and only the good bits had been selected for publication. The FDA chose to approve Paxil despite prior knowledge that the trial had not been completely accurate. While therapy or counseling is a better option than medication because it does not directly interfere with the patient's natural body, it is crucial to remember that the issue of treating surface-level emotions without fully understanding what's behind them and trying to eradicate these bad emotions still applies. During intense, uncomfortable, or high-stress situations, a child has a natural instinct to seek closeness with their caregiver. A parent's job is to be a secure foundation that child can turn to. But nowadays, these hard emotions are often pathologized or punished instead of stewarded. The problem now becomes clear. The lack of information surrounding children's emotional health creates an environment in which children are struggling to regulate. In response, society looks for the easiest solution, unfortunately missing the truth entirely. While medicine is certainly a good gift from God, we live in a world where every good thing has the potential to be distorted. The Bible gives believers clear instructions in Proverbs 25:16, which states, "If you have found honey, eat only enough for you, lest you have your fill of it and vomit it out," that we must be careful to consume all good things in moderation. Thank you.
Sarah Beth, can you give me some description of what CBT is?
Yeah,
Cognitive behavior therapy.
Cognitive behavioral therapy is a therapy that works on, it's mainly used to change behaviors. So behaviors that somebody doesn't like or something, that they're trying to change. And it works on, I didn't go super in depth onto how it works, but it works by trying to find maladaptive thinking and correct that thinking. And I do think it is a good option. I don't think it's a complete option though. And the reason I say that is because I originally started off stating that it should be cognitive behavioral therapy or some other behavioral therapy. But the more I talk to people, the more I realized that too was only trying to change behaviors and not trying to understand what was behind them. And so I started to advocate more for trauma-focused therapies that actually look for the root cause of that problem.
But CBT is done through talking with the patient and identifying the patterns.
Yes,
Okay.
It is a psychotherapy.
Cool. Thank you.
Sarah, you did a really good job. So I said Sarah, and my phone went off like I said Siri. So it seems like there's not a one-size-fits-all for every situation. That there's too many factors. And one of the things that I wonder, in your research, and this may be a dumb question, but should certain medications only be prescribed by certain types of physicians? Sometimes it seems like anybody can write a prescription for ADHD.
Yes. I personally believe, after extensive research, that primary care providers or like general practitioners, people that you see for checkups or for physical health, should not be prescribing mental health medication unless they have been through extensive training. So, for example, if like someone is a nurse practitioner, they've also taken therapy and counseling courses and they know how to assess those situations, then I think they are okay prescribing them. But if they are only a general care practitioner and they see a wide variety of patients and they don't have any specialized training in that, I do not think they should be prescribing those medications.
I think I might agree with you. And also, isn't the beginning or the hope when you're prescribed medication that it's a temporary thing?
Yes.
I don't think anybody takes their child to the doctor and thinks, okay, we're just going to be on this for the rest of our lives. But doesn't that happen sometimes? I mean, are they taught, if like you're talking about, who should be able to do that if they've got proper training, then can't they tell parents what the next step should be to do? So it's not just here, give them this medication and hope for the best.
Yeah, I think so. When medication is being used in short term like that, it can be a good thing, as I said before. The hope in that situation is that it will help decrease the intensity so that it can grasp the tools they're being taught. Unfortunately, what happens is they're never taught those tools. I talk a lot about emotional regulation. That is something that I didn't even know how. I still don't know how to do that. But more so, like
you don't still throw your spaghetti on the floor, do you?
But when I say it's medication is being used as a substitute, and when that happens, unfortunately, we have adults and teenagers who don't know how to emotionally regulate because they've been given this temporary solution that was only meant, like you said, to be temporary. And it doesn't end up being that way because they are replacing the tools they actually need, and then they never learn those tools, and so then they're on medication the rest of their lives.
So then sometimes if they try to get off and they haven't been taught those regulatory things, and then they can't function, it's like this cycle, I can't function without this. I have to be back on it.
It's debilitating because when they were not, at the proper time, when they were not taught the tools they needed, then they're years behind the rest of their peers. And it can be very frustrating when everyone around you can function, but you don't know how.
Well, I think you functioned in your paper very well. You did a very good job presenting all of this, Sarah.
Sarah, good job. It seemed like you were focused mostly on over-medication for ADHD. Is that accurate? Or
no?
Okay.
So I use a lot of examples of ADHD because they're the most common example, especially for young boys. Like I won't go into that, but it's the most common example. But it happens in my statistic research. It happens across
the board. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that sets up the question perfectly. So Elise presented earlier and
I
said
knew this question was gonna
too many kids are getting too much psychotherapy, and you're like, they're getting too much medication, they should get more psychotherapy. I'm curious, how would you debate her in short form?
We have had so many conversations about this. At least of what I understood when we talked about it was not saying that therapy is bad, but when therapy is used in substitution for parenting, and when therapy is used as something to, again, only treat the behavior and as a temporary solution kind of thing, it also can be bad. And I kind of was like cognitive behavioral therapy. I was kind of saying that too. Like it's a better option than medication because you're not adding a chemical into your body. However, we still need something more. And I tried to kind of introduce Elise to this idea of trauma-informed therapy and what that meant. And I'm not even like, I've just begun my research in that. I'm not fully developed in that area, but I can say that it makes a substantial amount of difference. And so I don't think that our theses disagree with each other.
Okay, I appreciate that. I have another question. I don't want it to be a super long one, but like, I'm a young parent. My kid has attention issues, maybe struggling with depression, one or the other, whatever. And the doctor says, hey, you need medication, your child needs medication, here's the prescription. You're their friend, what do you tell me?
Well, I think it's going to be a base-by-base cases, but oftentimes when parents get prescribed medication by doctors, it's because they feel desperate or they're just in a desperate situation. And the real question, I think the question that we need to ask first is, well, why are you so desperate? Is it the parent's desperate or is it the child is desperate? Because if the child is truly desperate, then there may be a need for medication. But if it's the parent not being able to, not parent, but if they aren't regulated or able to respond in healthy ways to stressful situations, the child's not going to be able to do that either. And so I think the first step would be like, hey, let's do some self-evaluation. And if that's been checked, then it's like, okay, let's evaluate some other factors first. And then I would say, okay, if everything has been evaluated and checked and you're certain that this is not a like environmental thing or a diet thing or a lot of other things, then we can say, okay, let's try medication.
That's great, thank you.
Sarah, you did do a really great job. Can you tell us a little bit about what led you to choose this in particular? Is it something?
Yeah, so I was medicated from the ages of 6 till 14, kind of on and off. And when I was talking about feeling behind, I was talking about me. When I came into high school freshman year, I was coming off almost all of my medications. And freshman year was very hard for me because it was like I was a 2-year-old emotionally in a 17 or 14-year-old's body, like emotionally. I didn't understand why I felt that way. But I had never been taught what emotional regulation was because I obviously struggled to regulate, but the answer was always medication. Not because my parents wanted that for me, but because they didn't know. And no one was helping them and supporting them. And so they were trying their best, but they didn't have the tools that they needed. And so freshman year was pretty rough. And I guess when I came down to picking a topic, I knew I needed to do something I was passionate about. And I knew I was passionate about this because of my own experience.
Yeah.
And now I'm majoring in psychology.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I appreciate your efforts to inform people because I think that that's really the root of the issue is that people rush to something, like you said, doctors, and it goes along with what you said, Howard, too, because people sometimes don't have the information, but they're also a little bit afraid to ask for it because you see professionals as someone who presents with authority, and that's not always the case. Some of these authorities, like you said, don't have all the information as well, and a lot of these studies are very short term, and so I appreciate you advocating for that out of your personal encounters.
I have just a real quick question. So you, this is obviously focused on children. Is there an age or stage where medication should become a higher priority of things to consider?
Yeah, so I think this is a good question because developmental stages, as I talked about, play a lot into this. So early childhood, I'm specifically focusing on young children. So, and you're going to ask, what do you define as young? I define as young as people under the age of 11. Mainly that's where my statistics, when it came to identity formation, personality, what they're learning about the world, what they're learning about themselves, what they're learning about others, that's very formative during those years. But also brain development is very formative during those years. It's still going on in the late adolescent age, but we have better results with teenagers, like older teenagers, like 18, 19, on medication than we do young children. And so, in fact, most of the cases where the kids ended up killing themselves were in young children, which is very unfortunate. And so I would say, later adolescence, it's not as, I'm not as apprehensive. I'm still apprehensive, but, if that answers your question.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no further questions, then